Hey guys, Put Some Man 945 here. Welcome back to another video. Um, so I was listening, because that's what I do with this regular channel, was listening to a new episode from my favorite Star Wars channel called Beyond the Dune Sea. Highly recommend their stuff. They're my favorite content channel. It's almost 11 p.m. and I can't talk, so this might make this video a bit rough, fair warning. But they're called Beyond the Dune Sea. They have like 6,000 subscribers. It's like two guys that just talk about Star Wars and some other stuff. This is one of the episodes where they talked about some other stuff, and the topic of it was like a perfect character. And of course, in the context of my channel, what this of course means is my favorite characters in fiction. Now, I'm making an update to this list for two reasons. Number one, it's been like 2 years since I made the last video. So I mean, most of the characters are pretty similar, but the placements have changed around a lot. So, um, also, when they were talking about the idea of a perfect character and the kind of criteria that they used for it, it kind of started to make me think about what is my own criteria for that. Um, I still don't really know if I have a clear idea about it necessarily. I kind of have like a rough outline in my head. So therefore, what I think like guidelines specifically are not going to be outlined in this video just because I can't really articulate them all. But like hopefully it is kind of understandable based on the characters that I pick here. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into the updated list. So, Um, remaining at the number 10 spot, like the last list, is Uguay. Now, why do I think Uguay is a perfect character? Because I think that him, along with the number 9 spot, they're both mentor characters. I think Uguay is the perfect mentor character because there is literally like he doesn't need any development. He's introduced and you know exactly what kind of character he's supposed to be. Like this is immediately obvious in the first Kung Fu Panda within the first like 2 minutes of him being introduced. You can tell that he is a very wise character. And like I think the idea to make Oogway a turtle is genius because turtles are very slow creatures, and that's exactly what Oogway emphasizes because many of the lessons of the first Kung Fu Panda not only are about Poe's struggles to believe in himself and his own ability to do things, but also in Shifu's development regarding um him being able to trust and have confidence and not and like being able to give the proper time to nurture something. And that's exactly what a turtle is analogous for because turtles are very slow creatures and they also are used to represent wisdom. So the whole idea of Oogway being a turtle is just brilliant. And then there's just the fact that like every single one of his like another factor that they consider, and I think it is somewhat part of my definition of what makes a perfect character is like personal relatability in some way. And there are so many like you can pick any one of Uguay's iconic quotes and it is applicable to someone's life in some way. Um, I think for me, the one that is most applicable to my life the is probably his most famous quote is the uh there are no accidents. And the reason why this is personal to me is because even though I'm not really much of a believer in like fate or destiny necessarily, I don't really interpret that quote that way. Mhm. What I instead interpret it as is every single decision that I make, I should have confidence in. And there could be um there should be like no doubt in the decisions I make. I should be confident in what I decide. And that's a big thing for me because I'm a very pragmatic person. I often have trouble thinking about the future in a lot of ways, and thinking about that quote makes me confident in the fact that I can make decisions about something in the future that I wasn't exactly thinking the most about. And so, in that respect, I think that Uguay ticks all the boxes for me of being a perfect mentor character because he is incredibly wise. His concept makes sense. His quotes make sense. His mentorship is actively developing characters and is crucial to the development of those characters. And number five, he kind of between both his appearances in Kung Fu Panda 1 and Kung Fu Panda 3, he makes a distinct role in the story that is not overplayed. Um, Now, my favorite mentor character of all time, and these two honestly go back and forth as being my two favorite movie characters of all time as well. Um, number nine is Yoda. And to be honest, between like the two of these, it would be hard for me to say a distinct answer exactly like what made Yoda better than Oogway because to be honest, I really don't think it's about a matter of like the difference in the quality of mentor characters. Instead, what I kind of think it is like um I think it's probably just the fact that I'm more of a bigger fan of Star Wars, and I think I've liked Yoda a little bit more for just a little bit longer than Oogway. But to be honest, the two of them are very, very close, almost to the point of being interchangeable, but not quite. Now, Yoda has all the same things that make Oogway the perfect mentor character. Because he has a very pronounced role in the story, and he actively helps develop the characters. AKA, he is not only are his fallacies in his vision crucial to the development of Anakin's character in falling to the dark side. That is a key part of the whole themes of the downfall of the Jedi and Anakin's fall to the dark side. But also, his wisdom is so crucial for helping Luke develop as a Jedi. And this is not just the case with the original trilogy, but, and this is the reason why the sacred Jedi text scene in The Last Jedi is my favorite movie scene of all time, is because even at Luke's status as a master, he is still getting taught things by Yoda. And Yoda makes a little cameo, and that he's just his only pronounced role in the story, and it is brilliant. And that is where my favorite quote of Yoda's, and the one that I personally can relate the most to, comes from. And it's probably um it is my favorite movie quote of all time, and I think this list would be too impossible to make, but it's probably like top five quotes in all of fiction for me. Um, and that quote is, "The greatest teacher failure is." And this is a quote that is personally relevant to me because, as I'm sure it is for a lot of people view failure as a thing to get upset about. Whereas Yoda, in by telling this to Luke, is telling him that you need to look at your mistakes and learn from them. And it's obviously a much more simpler take than maybe the kind of personal relation I could make to "There are no accidents" from Uruguay. But regardless, I think it still stands as a very powerful and relevant quote to not just me, but a lot of other people. Um, and with all those elements, it's why I think Yoda is another perfect mentor character, hence the number nine spot on this list. Now, number eight is Vegeta. Vegeta has moved down several spots on this list. And that was because of two reasons. I honestly almost considered not putting Vegeta on this list. But like the more I racked my brain, I thought that like it would be unfair of me to not include Vegeta on this list. Considering he was so high before. And all the praise that I have for Vegeta's character still remains because I think that seeing his arc from turning um and I think this is done amazingly with several Dragon Ball characters, but Vegeta, in my opinion, does the best of it. Um, he goes from a man who would, without a second thought, innocently murder a family, to creating his own family unit that he deeply, deeply cares for and would destroy entire populations and gods just to save. And that transformation for me and the sort of recognition of his weakness um through giving up his pride through continual defeat is just um it is a perfect character arc in my opinion. Now, um the other reason that I considered not putting Vegeta on this list is because technically Dragon Ball Super isn't finished yet. Now, at this point, considering it's been like a year and a half since the last chapter of the manga, not counting that like one-off special Trunks chapter. Um, I have, I honestly kind of have my doubts about like what the, not like doubts of Toyotaro being able to continue the story, but honestly, I have a little bit of doubt whether the stories even can continue. Um, and so as such, I don't know if Vegeta's character arc is technically complete because I don't know if the story has ended yet. Um, but what I kind of realized is that like even if Dragon Ball Super doesn't finish, what I can say is that at least within the context of Dragon Ball Z, which is a finished manga and anime, I can fully say that he has a complete character arc because I think that no moment more exemplifies this fact than during the Boost saga when he calls Goku a friend and recognizes his weakness in that moment and the fact that he can't do anything to stop Boo and leaves Goku to fight. And also the fact that he played that role of being like the distraction and the shield while Goku charged the spirit bomb. Um all of these aspects for me, especially when you think about where Vegeta started out as and how the continual losses humbled him, I think that Vegeta has a perfect character arc. Number seven is Gollum. Now, why I think Gollum has a perfect character arc is because I think that Gollum is the best character to show the problems of corruption and and like the dangers of corruption of power because um in Return of the King we obviously see how his life got ruined by the ring and how it just completely destroyed his mind over the course of him having it in alone in the Misty Mountains for 500 years. And um seeing the effect that Frodo had on Gollum was just incredible. It's like some of the most brilliant dynamic character writing in Lord of the Rings when there's already so much of that already that it's hard to pick. Um, because there's like this natural instinct to kind of suspect something and be suspicious of Gollum still when he is when he like begins to have this change in personality and suddenly begins to become more agreeable and obeying Frodo's commands. And then, you know, well there's two single moments that happen. Number one, Frodo calls him Smeagol for the first time, which was his actual given name. And then the second moment happens, which is another one of my favorite film scenes of all time. I don't know where it would rank because that would be too hard to think about right at this point, with how many movies I've seen. But the scene where it goes back and forth between Gollum's two personalities and the camera perspective constantly switches, and he seems to shut out the Gollum part of his personality to where the Smeagol side is more dominant. which is the side that he likes better, the side that Frodo awoke in him through their positive interactions. And that's when like all suspicions, at least for me, about like his change in attitude completely went away, disappeared. Because in that one scene alone, his palpable change is so um realistic that it's just impossible, at least for me, to have had any suspicion or doubt toward the character, which makes it all the more tragic when within the same movie he ends up um relapsing, and the Smeagol part of his personality once again becomes dominated by the the Gollum part of his personality in the scene where he is brutally beat up by Faramir's men in terms of getting answers, um and like the betrayal that is felt within that scene. And honestly, it's a much more subtle scene than the conversation in the separate camera angles between the two personalities, because the camera is just focused on him, except for like one cutaway of a confused expression of Faramir and his men. That's it. And that's what I think is a brilliant thing about that scene, is the fact that it doesn't really focus as much on Faramir's confusion, because that would have taken away from Gollum's character moment in the scene. And in fact, it doesn't even show their reaction to what Gollum says in that scene, which I think is just brilliant. Because it just adds so much more to Gollum's development here. Because after feeling this sense of betrayal, like doubt begins to creep in, and as such, the Gollum personality becomes more dominant. And the way that in one camera angle you hear both of the voices sort of talking to each other, and like, the kind of slow domination as you just see it all happen in one scene is just, after gaining so after this such intense feeling of hope at seeing the Smeagol part of his personality earlier in the movie, to see that all come crashing down is just heartbreaking, and yet so devastatingly realistic to a lot of people's struggles with things like substance abuse and alcoholism, in like how there are some people that unfortunately cannot escape the addiction. Um, and I don't know if that was Tolkien's intent when he wrote the character necessarily, but like Andy Serkis in that role as Gollum, in my opinion, gives one of, if not the greatest performances in all of cinema as Gollum. And then, of course, the whole thing is beautifully capped off by his incredibly poetic ending, where he, um, where he, where he falls in the lava with the ring, the thing that ended up ruining everything about his life in the first place, and the thing that he loved so much, and they are both destroyed simultaneously. It is a beautiful ending for the character that can be described as nothing short of poetic. Um, Now, a number six, and a new addition to this list is Friend from 20th Century Boys. Now, when I was thinking about characters to make for this list, I really wanted to include a character from um some kind of Urasawa work. But specifically, I wanted to really try and think about 20th Century Boys because of the fact that I mentioned in mobile videos. I think it's his magnum opus and by far the work that has his best character writing. Now, Ocho is my favorite character in 20th Century Boys. Um, in terms of enjoyability, and I think that he is a geniusly written character. That's like me saying that this character is not Ocho does not mean I think Ocho is a badly written character. I think his writing is also brilliant. But like when we are discussing the best written character in 20th Century Boys, and probably the greatest character written by Urasawa ever, it's very close between him and Johan. Number six spot goes to Friend. Now, the next three spots on this list are villain characters. And and my criteria for or one of many criterias I have for a villain. Um as I kind of went over in the massive villains list that I made, in my opinion, one of the most important characteristics as to what makes a perfect villain is how how their character and presence affects not only the main character but also the overall presence, like the overall story as a whole. And I think of the three villain characters here, I actually think that Friend actually probably does this the best of these three villain characters at 6, 5, and 4. Um, because what Friend is able to do is not only is the entirety of the mystery in 20th Century Boys completely like the core of it is around the identity of Friend and his actions. That is the core of the mystery. That is the core of the story. Um, but also like simply the actions that he did, which seem unbelievable, and yet they just happen because that is how significant Friend's presence on the story is. Like for example, the 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 FDP walking into the United Nations and giving that speech, and that's basically the moment where they control the worldwide stage. Or much earlier in the story when Friend by himself, not even with the other like members of the FDP, but like Friend himself is just standing uh in a gigantic crowd of cult members. Like you see these moments with the palpable effect that he has on the story. And no moment in the entirety of the story of 20th Century Boys better depicts this than his death scene at the World Expo. And the effect that this has on the story is so large and so insane and important and um I can't there's a word I'm thinking of to describe it, but like I can't exactly think of it. Um it's so like massive in scale that for the rest of the story until its very end, the the like what society looks like as a whole, and it's not even the first time that it happens in the story, but it's to an even bigger scale. Society just um looks completely different. And I just talked a lot about Friend's massive presence on the story, but why Friend to me is also a perfect villain is because of the fact that he his development and how that is like the core of the mystery is just brilliant writing because as the story goes on and like once you learn that Friend is actually Fukube, then what the story is able to do is provide so much more context to the mystery, which not only makes the resolution of the mystery more satisfying, but it also contributes to the character development. So that's why not Urasawa's writing is so genius, is because it does both of those things at the same time. And learning about Fukube's character and like learning about his values and how the only thing that he wanted was a true friend, someone that he would think was his equal. And yet he had such a hard time finding that because even though he was able to make friends, there was no one that ever really matched the status that he had in his head. And and kind of seeing the reaction and kind of comparing this with his dynamic with Kenji is so interesting because even though they aren't friends, um Fukube regards Kenji as his equal in a lot of ways because of the fact that because of how afraid he gets when Kenji is mentioned, because of like how he essentially makes Kenji blacklisted from society and remembered in history as a terrorist. And because of the way that Kenji's presence affects Friend. Um And I think that that last point is even further exemplified by the second friend who reemerges after Fukube dies. Uh, toward the end of the story, and of course, I don't remember the character's name, but like who he actually was. I don't remember the character's name, but like when his identity is revealed, that last point makes especially makes sense because of the fact that um because of the fact that this character, whose name was only mentioned as a one-off near the beginning of the story, um, felt left out, felt insignificant, and therefore you can further contribute that to the dynamics between Friend and Kenji because of the fact that it relates to Fukubei's issues, despite the fact that they're completely different characters. So, Friend to me is a perfect character because I think he has perfect development, and I think that he could not have played a more perfect role in the story in which he was presented. Now, number five is Thanos. Thanos is my favorite Marvel character and my favorite villain in all of fiction. And even though there is a villain character ahead of him at the number four spot, I will explain the difference. Um, because as purely a villainous character, Thanos is the most perfect villain possible in my opinion. Because Thanos has such complex motivations and goals, and and this being like his entire idea to like destroy half of all life is on such a grander scale than any other Marvel villain, either before Infinity War or in any of the movies since then. There has still not been a villain that's come close to the grandeur and level of ambition and goal as Thanos had of, well, both versions of it, frankly, because in Infinity War he wanted to erase half of all life in the universe, and in Endgame he wanted to remake the entire universe in his own image. Um, and even though that part of him is less prominent in Endgame because that he isn't as much of the focus, it is still, I think, prominent for the point because of the fact that it's like an insane ambition and it's, as I've said, way bigger than any other Marvel villain either before him or after him. And like the way that this is complemented with the richness of his dynamics with Gamora in terms of like Thanos sees Gamora as a justification of his ideals because Gamora's planet, Gamora was part of the population that was saved. And Thanos raised Gamora to be this great warrior, the most feared woman in the galaxy, as is her epithet. And so Thanos views Gamora, his own daughter, not only in a familiar sense as his own daughter, but also like as the successful product of his own image. And so when Gamora ends up denying him and pushing him away, this does not deter him in any way. And in fact, all it does is make him actually even more convicted in his desire to achieve his destiny. And in my opinion, and in what is another top five movie scene of all time for me, across both movies, but in particular in Infinity War, the Vormir scene is just a masterclass in cinema because the emotional resonance of both characters, the fact that um Thanos's view of his successful image getting shattered ends up further and as I said earlier, ends up further motivating his convictions and goals. Well, where it used to be in unison, that begins to come in conflict with his familial love for Gamora as his daughter. And seeing the palpable tension in his face during that scene as as he's considering weighing both options, and ultimately his conviction ends up winning out, and yet despite the deep emotional trauma this causes him is just insane. And this is not just an action where he struggles a lot in the moment, and like this isn't it's not an action where he just merely suffers in the moment and then he pursues his conviction throughout the rest of the film. No, this one action singularly defines his entire character for the rest of the film, because he references it in multiple quotes, and even when it's not mentioned directly, you can tell, like, um his true feelings, such as like when Mantis gets in his mind, um and they're trying to like manipulate his head and whatnot. Like, you can tell that he's still suffering from kind of conflicted feelings. And then there's this scene near the very end where he sees a vision of child Gamora, where she asks what did it cost, and he says everything, which just goes to show how committed to his goal that he was. And in my opinion, that is a perfect, complete character arc for him as a villain. And then, of course, there's the idea of his presence in the story, which is exemplified by how how his actions would and did literally affect the universe as a whole. So that is why I think Thanos is the greatest villain in all of fiction. Um, but like even more than Friend or Thanos, who have such a significant role in their own story. What I think is even more than that is a not even just a villain, because uh this is why the villain number four spot, even though Thanos is my number one villain, this character is slightly ahead, and that is because the number four spot, Griffith, within the context, Griffith as a character has such a significant presence that he expands beyond the story of Berserk. That is how magnificent and grand his 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 entire existence as a character is. And he is so significant in that way that he just fundamentally, because he is a larger than story character, he is literally the reason why the entire story happens at all, which is not quite the same thing that you could say about Friend or Thanos, I feel like. Because Griffith's every action, his every motivation, it is a crucial point in Berserk. Like, For one example, him wanting to rise in the ranks and thus him ordering the assassination of the queen. This is one example, and it's one of the smaller ones that I can think of right off the bat. Um, what this one action results in is a fundamental change to the status of the kingdom, a fundamental change to Griffith's level of status and his interactions with the king, and for that matter, um the princess, and that kind of romance essentially is established because of this one action and Griffith courting her due to the queen's loss of influence and control over the daughter and skepticism over Griffith's presence, along with the queen's central presence as this kind of council of officials that opposed Griffith's influence with the queen's assassination, like that council of people almost immediately collapses, and as such, Griffith's influence within the kingdom um just rises almost unopposed. But what does this also impact character-wise? Beyond Griffiths himself, it also fundamentally changes the relationship between Guts and Griffith entirely, because it goes to show that it shows that Griffith Griffith is at the point where he considers Guts his equal and his true friend, and as such, he is willing to entrust to him a task that he thinks that only Guts can do. But not only does this one small action change um their dynamic, it also significantly changes Guts' character as well. Because this moment is a big development for Guts' character in terms of him like mindlessly following Griffith's orders specifically. Um and it really shows the very messed up dynamic that the two of them have. So that is one action, one order that Griffith does, which significantly alters the story. And that is purely because Griffith is such a larger than story character that he is able to affect the story in this way. Now, I think that like to cap it off this section, I think that um the point that I will conclude with Griffith being one of the greatest characters ever created due to his larger than story status is because of the eclipse. I think that the eclipse in Berserk is the greatest section of fiction and media of all time. Attack on Titan might be my favorite individual work, and Attack on Titan Season 3 is like probably my second favorite within this category. But in terms of like a span of chapters or an arc or whatever, or a series of events within a piece of fiction, The Eclipse is, in my opinion, the greatest series of events in a piece of fiction ever. And this is because the entire event is formulated around Griffith's ascension as the fifth member of the Godhead. The entire event and everything that happens with all the character deaths and Guts's mental collapse as a character and Griffith's mental collapse as a character, his mental collapse as a character. It is all centered around Griffith's presence in the story. And it is just it is just peak fiction. It is the definition of perfection, in my opinion, and peak fiction. Now, to be honest, after I said all that about Griffith, there are some that would think that he is probably worthy of a number one spot. And to be honest, I couldn't exactly 100% refute that. And being 100% honest, the top three in this list are probably I might not consider as perfect of a character in all aspects as Griffith is, maybe except the number one spot, but I I like them more than Griffith, and that's why they're ahead. Now, and number three is Siri. Siri is my favorite female character in all of fiction because she has like the greatest journey in fiction, in my opinion. Like the greatest solo journey slash development journey of any character ever. Because she is from a very young age, she has to deal with extreme loss due to all of her family getting murdered. And she has to deal with extreme displacement issues because she's constantly on the run and she doesn't know how to use her powers or even what her powers are to be real. Um, and that as a result, um, and like it puts her in a very dark place. And the only solace that she has is to find Geralt, who is her destiny. And then she finds that, and it creates one of my favorite family dynamics in fiction. Um, Even before you include Yennefer, realistically, that list is coming soon. I saw a comment about it a while ago now, and I haven't made the list, but I will at some point. I didn't forget about that idea. Um, but like, I think even before Yennefer is included, like that's one of the best family dynamics in fiction. It's just Geralt and Ciri by themselves, and it only gets even more better when Yennefer is included in that trio. Um, and Geralt is like this guiding light in her life after all this dark um and depression, and especially once Yennefer comes in, there is so much like dynamicness to series character in terms of like her incorporating different aspects of different characters, such as like wanting to learn to be a witcher and learning magic with Yennefer and developing her own identity by learning about her heritage and her powers. And And then you get to when he is displaced in uh what is the book name? Before Baptism Fire. I'm going to I'm going to actually drive myself crazy. I don't remember what it is. I was indeed a complete idiot. It's Time of Contempt. I don't know how I didn't remember the name of that book. But when she's separated in that book, and throughout the entirety of Baptism of Fire and then Tower of Swallows as well, like she is completely on her own. And Um, and even in spite of the fact that she ends up making friends and almost another family with that group with the rats, she still is in a lot of ways on her own because of the fact that she is tortured, she is held prisoner for insane amounts of time. Not exactly treated very well by the rats, and so as a result, she has a lot of like very personal struggles that no one is there to help her with, and she just has to sort through them herself. And I think that the way that she does this is just like it's the best character writing in The Witcher, which already has such a brilliant character writing already. um and that's not even talking about The Witcher 3 stuff, her where like being able to play as Ciri gives the player in the game like an active role in Ciri's story, and I love that. And Ciri's development in The Witcher 3 is also just peak. Ciri is just I love Ciri. um Now, speaking of a character that I feel like I can insert myself into. That is number two, Revan. Um, God, I don't even know what to say about. Okay, let me start with this. So, Revan is my favorite. Revan is a perfect Star Wars character, in my opinion, and the best Star Wars character because of the fact that I think that there is no other character that better encompasses the true range of the Force like Revan does, because he begins as a light side, he goes to the dark side, and he ends up light side again, but more balanced because he ends up with the thought process that not all aspects of the dark side are necessarily bad. Um, and I feel like the ultimate experience with that is just incredible. And and when you play KOTOR, there is this idea that you can insert yourself into the role of the main character and make choices, and then it's revealed that you actually are Revan, which completely recontextualizes everything that every choice that you make in the game is completely recontextualized with that reveal. And it also changes your feelings toward the character. But not only that, because you were the one playing the game, making the choices, it changes what you think about yourself by doing that. And the fact that that's achieved in a video game is just insane to me. Much less a Star Wars video game, which is like basically completely originally invented by BioWare. But then there's the extra content which really adds to his development in like the books and SWOTR and such. And I think that SWOTR actually did a brilliant job in terms of concluding Revan's character, because of the way that the Force splits seem to be the spiritual successor to how the different actions of Revan could have manifested in comparison to like actually playing as Revan and making the choices. You get to see these two different manifested outcomes, and at least to me, it's fun to imagine like what those scenarios look like. So, um, I think that Revan is a key character for that reason as well, because I think that he just has a quite frankly beautiful character arc. Like that is the only way to describe it. Um, and I think like in terms of Revan's presence as a whole on Star Wars, I feel like Revan was essentially one of the founding points of the entirety of Star Wars Legends as a concept. Like, if BioWare did not create, like, if BioWare ended up making a Clone Wars era game and not something completely original, then I feel like the whole outlook of Star Wars would look so different without Star Wars Legends having one of its defining pillars to me. Um, and that is why Revan is number two on this list and my favorite Star Wars character. But unchanged from last time, my number one on this list is still Aaron because um Aaron is, I think, another example like Griffith of a larger than story character, and yet one that I think is done better than Griffith just ever so slightly because of the fact that he is still so crucially important to every single character in the story at the same time, and his interactions with them, with with all the characters, are so important for Aaron's character as a whole. Um, which I feel like is not necessarily something that I could say for Griffith, at least not to the same extent I feel like I can for Aaron's character. Now, regarding personal relatability, that hasn't come up as much since I talked about the mentor characters, but and I do really have to be specific because this can obviously be taken very out of context, with, um, if I don't specify what version of Aaron I find personally relatable. But what I'm specifically talking about is Aaron from seasons one and two, where he is young, he is idealistic, he is incredibly passionate about those ideals that he has. And I can relate to this personally because I have a lot of ideals that I am very, very passionate about that I um would give a very, very hard case in terms of sacrificing those ideals for any reason. And the way that that influences Aaron's character further into season four, because I'm going to say it now, Aaron is not a villain. Does he do awful things? Yes, but I think that there is a justification for every one of them. Number one, and the biggest reason, which is very clear in the final parts of Attack on Titan, um like the conversation between Armin and Aaron, like revealing how he is actually just a fool that got his hands on power, and how he never really got past being that young and idealistic um fool. And to me, that is just the ultimate journey of any character. Like, I said that Siri has the greatest soul journey, but I specifically was referring to the way that her actions like how I felt like how much she did by herself alone and not necessarily the like I think when it comes to overall journey of a character, Aaron has the best because of the fact that that horror was still there up until the very last episode of Attack on Titan just makes his character more complete, in my opinion, than any other character could possibly be in fiction. And and um I've talked about Aaron in so many different ways on this channel before, and I think that that kind of angle was really the only one in which I haven't talked about it before, or at least I feel like I talked about it somehow in a new way here. So I'm not really going to discuss every other detail of why I think Aaron's character is at this number one spot. I think that this explanation personally is satisfying enough. But also this video is an hour and 6 minutes long, and it's almost midnight, and so I need to be going to bed and finishing up this video soon. So that explanation is why Aaron is my number one character in fiction. Um, and that has been my updated list of my top 10 characters in fiction. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you watched it all the way. It was a very long video. Um, or even if you only watched a little bit of it, I still appreciate that too. Let me know in the comments, what do you think makes a perfect character? What are your sort of personal, broad, or even very specific criteria if you happen to have that in your head? What are your criteria for what makes a perfect character? And and what is your favorite characters in fiction? But yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.